Can I ask you a contrarian question? Do you think C players can become A players? Is that possible?
I just think that...
You hear people talk a lot about A players, and the question then becomes, what makes an A player? A players, for me, fall into three camps. There are A players that make you money, meaning the creative that comes up with the idea. You have this secondary camp of A players that aren't as obvious. These are people that save you money, and those A players are usually underrepresented and underappreciated because it isn't as obvious. And then I think you have this really rare camp of like both. In this week's Memes and Machines, we explore a unexpected night collaboration that I saw in the street and blew my mind. It reminded me of a very important lesson. We talk about attention hacking at all costs. Alexander Wang, did they do the right thing with their latest viral content? Catman dropped a tweet. It was his most retweeted, most liked tweet ever. What did he say and why was it so contested? And finally, we dive into talent. What are some of the lessons that we've learned through managing agency businesses and hiring lots of people? What have we learned about A players and what really is an A player? And more importantly, how do you find them? And finally, we find out that Catman is off to Eastern Europe to rave for a few days next week. So we're going to do a special Godtown episode. Boom. Catman, it is good to see you. Summer is summering. How's your week been?
Been great, mate. Been great. Look at my face looking lovely and golden. The sun beaming through the window.
Always looking golden.
Doing all the heavy lifting on my pale complexion.
You're one of the only people I know that actively avoids the sun at all costs. It's a very un-British trait.
Yeah, I think it's my mum kind of instilled it in me very early. I'll never forget her telling me that you can still tan in the shade because the wind will bring the UV rays to you. And I think it stuck with me. It's a deeply embedded natural fear of me to avoid the sun.
Absolutely. I love how parents are just willing to lie to their children. Father Christmas, your eyes are going to go square, all of it.
Yeah. It does, to be fair, it keeps you looking young. That's the one thing I'll say.
Good stuff. Well, I also think I had this conversation about one of the biggest movements we're about to see in cosmetics and well-being generally is addressing UV rays.
Yeah.
Because, in Britain, obviously, it's an infrequent event when we get some sunshine. But in most cases, that still isn't stopping the rays coming through. And I think all product ranges, whether that's moisturizers, I think UV is going to become the universal thing. You know, we went through phases where like protein entered everything. Cereal with added
collagen.
Protein or, collagen was a thing. I think everyone's going to dial in for the next 2 years. If this was an all predicts, that's what I would say. Backed up by no data, all anecdotes, speculation, just how I like to do it.
There you go. This isn't a skincare podcast, by the way. If anyone's tuning in for the first time, we should make that clear.
It's not a skincare podcast. I will say this morning I went to, I'll give you a little view into my world this morning. I went to the embassy in the UK for UK trade. And we did a road show with LG. The management team from LG had flown over from Korea, and we got an opportunity to talk about innovation and driving sales for a tech company. So that was an interesting start to the day. And one of the things that really, I suppose, really became evident in that meeting is when you have these large multi-territory global businesses that are largely governed in a different part of the world, although they have representatives and agencies and support and leaders in territory, there's a real disconnect culturally about how they view everything's very rigid and modeled. So it was a good opportunity for us to showcase what we're up to, the work that we do. But it does make me think how much opportunity some of these brands really have to just level up their marketing. And we did the classic agency thing where we looked at their ad library, looked at it and thought, this is the trash.
Yeah.
So ineffective, basically taking their point of sale display, putting them in performance ads. And we tried to politely say that everything they're doing is trash. Or probably all the people in the room that signed that off. So not an easy dance to walk, but I think we're well versed in it now. Insulting someone while trying to remain true to what we believe.
Nice.
Which is good. Dude, I also did see something. I'd love to get your take on it. I saw a bright pink Rolls Royce. I was walking into the office. And my first thought was that is disgusting. Is this kind of some tacky C-list celebrity that's got too much money? And then I peeked around the corner and I see a big Nike logo. And it had a matte finish and it was done really well. And I thought, is this a Nike superfan? Is this a brand collaboration? And my train of thought started to think this is really cool. And I was very quickly reminded of how powerful brand is. Because imagine that, just logically. I see something, I go, that's disgusting and tacky. The minute I associate it with a brand, my entire feelings and perceptions of what that was and how it looked completely changed, because Nike has decades upon decades of emotional connection with me based on all the amazing ads and athletes they sponsor and things that they're involved with. And I changed my mind and I just realized how crazy the work we do is sometimes in marketing. We're changing perceptions. Give me your take on bright pink cars with Nike logos on, transcending logic. What do you say?
Was it definitely a official Nike activation, or are you not sure?
So I wasn't sure at first, but under the grapevine, I asked someone who knew someone who would probably be involved in something like that.
Yeah.
And apparently they're up to mischief, doing lots of things.
Got it.
Interesting activation. So it is a Nike thing. And it did look too good to just be like a super fan.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? I think that's as long as the execution is clean, they're going to get some benefit there. It does feel a little surprising of a Nike activation. I saw it yesterday, actually. I saw my first Cybertruck in New York, the first one I've seen. And it was a same thing. It was a brand had parked it outside a hotel and they'd stuck their stickers on the side. And I thought it was a pretty naff idea.
Okay.
Just because I feel like, sometimes I reverse engineer the creative meeting that happened. And someone said, let's stick a Cybertruck outside a hotel and put our stickers in it. You just go, eye roll, go, all right, yes. It's like the kind of, we've run out of ideas part of the meeting. I think with Nike, I would be surprised if it wasn't part of a bigger activation. Maybe it was like a creator collaboration or something they did. But yeah, I think one thing that's happened that's interesting is that brands have become like stewards of creativity, right? They're not just advertisers, but they're also culture makers, which I think is, they see themselves as having this huge role to play in culture, right? Like when a new artist or musician releases something, brands want to be involved. It's why we see brands sponsor music videos now, right? It's why, I think sport has been a really interesting case study in how close they've come to fashion and other cultures, right? Is that brands feel like they have this big role to play. I'll never forget, Paul Pogba being announced for Man United, and it was a Stormzy / Adidas music video, which I think was one of the great kind of, football cultural moments. And it's a good reminder that brands have this kind of creative role to play in culture right now, which is I guess a giant pink Rolls Royce is the epitome of that.
I agree with the latter part. I don't agree with the activation piece where you thought it was naff. I'll tell you why. I'll give you my rebuttal. If we were in a room debating this, I will give you my rebuttal. So my view, take the pink Nike Rolls Royce. I stopped, looked at that, paid attention, and I left with a positive feeling. I shared that, and 30,000 people now have viewed that thing I shared on LinkedIn. You kind of just go through that and go, extrapolate a few times. What does it cost to hire a Rolls Royce for the day? Let's say $1,000, $2,000, I don't know.
Yeah.
parked in prime location London, similarly to a Cybertruck. Cybertrucks haven't proliferated New York yet, I don't think. I know there's probably a few, but they're few and far between. They certainly haven't made their way across to Europe. If you're like, imagine like you can't get people's attention. You're a logo, you're a name, you're a proposition. To get people to stop and look is always our first job.
Yeah.
Really, right? The stop and look is our first job. And that's kind of exactly what these tactics and hacks have done. So do I think they deserve an award for their efforts? And have we seen this a million and one times? Yes. But I do kind of respect it if used tactically in the right way. So that would be my closing arguments if we were in court, Catman.
I just think, and these are my closing arguments, I just think that Nike don't have any problem reaching, like certain demographics, our demographics, right? Like, we've grown up with Nike, we're very familiar with it. I'm not sure if hiring a fancy car and wrapping it pink is still the kind of thing which appeals to the demographic, which I think Nike is struggling with, which is the kind of younger Gen Z, Gen Alpha, up and coming, where just like this like flashiness, I don't think appeals to that kind of age demographic like it used to. And it just felt a little bit tired. This, honest to God, when I saw your LinkedIn post, I thought to myself, there's no way that's Nike, and there's no way they signed that off, because it just felt like the kind of thing I might have seen 10 or 15 years ago. But we'll see.
Okay. No, we can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
But I do think it's an interesting topic, this kind of this attention hacking phenomenon.
Yeah.
That we see more and more. Did you see the Alexander Wang ad or kind of piece of content? Tell me if you did see it, and tell me about it, because it's kind of on the same theme.
Yeah, it's an Instagram reel of Alexander Wang. Let me start again. Basically, Alexander Wang, they hired a bunch of lookalike celebrities. So a person who looked eerily similar to Ariana Grande, Beyonce, who else was on there? Kim Kardashian, Kylie Jenner, these superstars. They just hired people that looked very, very similar, but not quite exactly like these celebrities, and filmed them doing a kind of box opening of some of their products. And you immediately, when you see it, you see Kylie Jenner, you see Taylor Swift is on there as well, and you kind of immediately are hooked, because you're like, oh, damn, this is like the A-list of the A-list opening Alexander Wang boxes. That's a pretty decent, they must have paid a lot for that, or they've killed it. And then you look a bit closer and you're like, oh, wait, no, that's not actually them. And it's just enough to keep your attention and hold your attention for long enough for the algorithm to recognize that, oh, this person viewed it, we're going to show it to the next 10,000 people and then the next 100,000 people. And was a reminder that all of these brands, no matter how much reach you already have, are in this constant attention battle where they now have to really hack our attention, but also hack the algorithm to get in front of so many people, because there's just this like massive, there's two things that are happening. There's like inflation of content right now. Like there's just more and more content being produced on the internet. But we're now entering this, what I consider to be like a huge shift actually in the way social media works. That we went from this like following feed to now a discovery feed, where every single platform is doing the same. And it started with TikTok, and they kind of realized that if we just tell people what content they want to see, rather than them telling us, rather than us following, we're gonna retain people on the platform for longer. We're now seeing it with TikTok, Twitter, and we're now seeing it with Instagram as well. And so what that means for brands is they can't just post the product photo out and it's going to reach the 1 million people that they've collected over the last 20 years. They now have to do these tricks that's going to feed the content to their potential audience. And so we're going to keep seeing these like cheap attention hacks come and go. There's going to be trending ones. I think we saw a few weeks ago where people were recreating memes or like fail videos of people falling over and then cutting it so one of their kind of employees or creators would appear on the other side. We're going to see a bunch of this. And I don't know if it's good or bad. It's definitely in some ways creative, but at times it can feel a bit tacky and feel a bit cheap.
I agree. I I think there's a role for it as a tactic. One of my favorite accounts right now is the dim sum restaurant in London, whereby his whole thing, restaurant owner, is like causing some scene in London outside his restaurant, a robbery, he's been knocked over, and he just promotes the restaurant, and it's hilarious.
Yeah.
It is like full-on humor. And he's really taken that to, he's amassing a big following on Instagram because of the reels. He's got a huge TikTok following. And for a small independent restaurant now, it's a cult phenomenon. And I have no doubt if I walked past that restaurant, there will be queues and queues and queues of people wanting to visit and see. In the same way like Salt Bay built his brand, they've got this really interesting flower. So I go, you know what, as a marketeer, bang for buck, phenomenal. My favorite one of his, and it's a bit of a side point, but I will share it. He basically plastered the front window of the shop. So think all the brand triggers, location, proximity, everything. And he put people who follow him on a board and like threw something at it to win a free meal.
That's cool.
Like, I just think there's so much, and I don't even know. It's like if someone came into a brand and pitched these ideas as like intentional and there was insight and there's a strategy behind it, you would go, this is genius.
Yep.
But I don't know if it is that purposeful. I just think you've just got a really creative guy that's had the, you know, the bug for going viral and now just continues to show up in the way. He's created the culture to be effective at marketing. You know, when we always talk about culture eats strategy, he's got the culture for winning and going viral. Side point, but my general thesis on kind of the Alexander Wang, although I looked at it, I thought highly effective, did what it meant to do. It made me stop in my tracks. We're talking about it now. Where I draw the line is I think there's room for that type of thing with collaborations through creator channels. We should no longer think of social media strategies as organic, my channels and paid media. They are one and the same. It is an ecosystem. And you have many ways to distribute your message. And on your own channels, I think that should be the closest source of truth to your brand. It should represent you aspirationally for most companies, particularly a luxury fashion brand and designer. I feel they need to preserve that at the cost of probably extra likes, extra engagement. However, I believe there's room for being playful, being viral, being hacky in other places. We talked about it before, Loro Piana, you know, collaborating with a creator that mocks them is like a really good way to show up in an authentic native way, but doesn't, I suppose, erode the integrity that is like premium Italian luxury brand on their own channels and in spaces where you kind of expect a cinematic or you have a certain expectation. So I wasn't a massive fan of this existing on their channels, but I thought it was a great piece of content. So that's where my conflict sits.
Yeah, I think that's a good take, and I've seen that myself working with, you know, various brands, working with Gucci even this year, where they're creating content through my channel that they would never dream of hosting themselves. And like, I don't want to see that content on their page. You go to Gucci's page, it shouldn't have memes on it. It shouldn't have this kind of what is, you know, always going to be perceived to be slightly lower brow than their super high quality luxury content. So yeah, I think one ecosystem is a nice framing.
So you mentioned you did a bit of a shameless plug about Gucci there. Some would argue a bit of a brag.
Bit of a brag, yeah.
It'd be interesting. Tell me your creative process. Tell me what Gucci comes to you, they brief you in. What process did you go through and what was the end product?
That's a good question. So they, you know, when you work with a brand, I usually will ask a lot of questions, right? So I'll try and get very close to like what the kind of thing they want to see. And I always ask them like, what are 2 or 3 posts that you've seen from me in the past that you think you would like to kind of replicate? And that kind of gives me a starting point. But honestly, my creative process when it comes to like, you know, creating something, I have this huge Figma document which has every single post I've ever made in one place. It's a complete mess, but it basically allows me to like pull on, you know, like 4 or 5 years of references that I've used in the past. And it tends to be like a combination of 2 or 3 past ideas, which I think has been just generally helpful for me to getting to like getting to a right answer quicker, basically.
Okay, so questions 0 to 1 playbook.
Yeah.
Boom, off you go.
There you go.
Catman's keeping his cards close to his chest. I'm okay with that. Gucci's Gucci. You did write something this week I thought was interesting. So you caused quite a stir with one of your, I can't say Twitter anymore, one of your X takes. Read me the thread. Tell me what you said, and then what happened, what transpired.
Yeah, it's interesting. Probably, I think my most liked tweet ever this week, from my personal account, I might add. It was, I basically,
oh shit, this has escalated. I'm just looking at it now. I didn't realize, I saw it. I didn't realize it's gone so boom.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I think it was interesting. It was probably the first time I've seen this kind of new discovery algorithm really at play. Like, obviously, running Third Web's account, I see it a little bit, but when you get it on your personal account, you really see how Twitter now works, where once you get a little bit of traction, it got 50 likes in the first couple of hours. You then see it accelerate slowly as Twitter will show it to more and more people. And you start to get buckets of people. So I remember at first it was the kind of crypto influencers saw it, and then it was moved to tech, and then it kind of broadens. And so it was a bit of a crash course on seeing how Twitter kind of serves viral content now. But yeah, anyway, the post was basically about how I think it's an important thing for people to realize early in their career that in the kind of business ecosystem we live in today, which is heavily driven by social media, thought leaders, LinkedIn, this kind of content-first world, you can sometimes be misled by the perception that some people, who are very visible, so that means that they're tweeting a lot, that they're doing a lot of personal brand work, they're at events, they're appearing in lists and blogs and all this kind of stuff. It's very easy to conflate that with somebody being really, really good at what they do and being a really good executor. And I've started to encounter more and more people over the last few years who I have this perception that they are A+, A+ at their job, or just incredible at what they do. Because I see their face a lot, they tweet a lot, they just have this very visible appearance in the industry. And then when you speak to a few people or you spend some time in their organization, you realize that actually they're just really good at being visible. They're not actually good at executing. And it tends to not have this kind of sustainable long lifetime when it comes to leaving a lasting impact. And I think it's important for young people to realize that, because there's going to be a lot of people now who start their careers and believe that the number one thing they need to do is get 10,000 followers on Twitter or 50,000 followers on LinkedIn. And they'll find that they get really good at doing that. They don't get good at actually executing. And this isn't to say that building an audience isn't important. I think it is. It's the number one competitive advantage you can have is owning that distribution. But the best people I know at building audiences have 5-10 years of A+ execution behind them, which A, gives them something really compelling to say, and B, they're not reliant on audience building as the only thing they can talk about. And you see this a lot when somebody gets really good at building an audience, but they haven't actually executed something else before that. They tend to then just talk about building audiences. They sell a course on it. It doesn't really have this long lifetime. They don't really have an area to be an expert in. And so that was my take on it. And for some reason, I think caused some debate, but actually mostly was people agreeing with it. And I think it was a bit of I think the reason they posted well, somebody asked me this, why do you think it got so many likes? I think it was a lot of people just felt this kind of almost relief that somebody else was thinking this, right? A lot of people were saying oh, this speaks to me. I feel like I'm not doing enough. I feel like I'm not visible enough. But actually, if you're in the weeds and you're executing, you're building, that's equally as, valuable and important.
I think it did really well looking at this, and you can never know when something's going to work. But for me, it does one of the core principles of you say something with strong conviction. You've got an idea that isn't maybe talked about enough. There's an element of originality. It's also got a bit of people like to steer into somewhat negativity. It's got a bit of a negative twang. It's the truth, but I think people steer into that. And fundamentally, you're saying the thing in the room that most people agree with, but either haven't been able to articulate or dare not say. And like, it just embodies all of those things, right? So, I thought it was a really interesting take. I fundamentally agree with you. I would say I did a podcast this week with it's a graduate podcast, and its whole purpose is giving young people advice. And I said the same thing. I said the number one thing that you can do at the start of your career is, yes, your competitive advantage can be, we call it digital leverage, whether that's owning an audience or understanding some technologies that other people or incumbents around you don't understand. But foundationally, your number one thing is to develop skills. Become very skillful at something. And that should never change. That is the foundation. And it's really interesting. Professor, is it Scott Galloway? Not Scott Galloway. Yeah, Scott Galloway. He's a big proponent of young people pursuing passion. They conflate passion with hobby. And they don't fully understand that actually you develop passion through mastery. You become passionate about things. I don't think every finance person that achieved great heights, you're the CFO of Apple, I don't think you grew up at like 14 years old and went, you know what, I love spreadsheets and calculators. You may have had a natural amplitude for those things, but you don't love it. But I'm sure through mastery, he's achieved a level of passion for the craft and business and all the skills that you develop on the way. So I think it definitely speaks to all of this. I would say the only exception to this rule is those that do both simultaneously. Because I think content creation is one of the biggest hacks for learning and development. Not the outcome is, sure, you might be able to build an audience and have some distribution and be present on people's profiles, but the biggest value add is the development and learnings that you take, through the feedback of sharing your ideas and being able to either modify your ideas, have more conviction, or change them. And then B, through the relentless pursuit of having to learn new things. Whenever you're at you'll know this, whenever you go into like heavy periods of writing, it forces you to learn in a way that you typically don't when you're bogged down with other things. I know when I'm creating the most content, that's probably when I'm learning the most. And it's always the same. So I thought it was a great take. And I think there's an adjacent point here that I don't think this just applies to individuals and people. I think the same applies to brands. Point in case, I've been championing the app Thursday, the dating app forever, love their LinkedIn marketing, and I still do. But maybe several months ago, they came out and got rid of 85% of their staff. And that was so at odds with my view and perception of how that business was developing and the awards they were winning and being revered. So you see this time and time again. I don't think it's universal. I think your point still stands for brands as well. But I thought it was a really insightful take. And did you get any trolls? Was there anyone that you just thought, you know what, I'm going to go to war. I'm going to go to war with this person?
I did. I had a little bit of back and forth with somebody.
What did they say?
They made a comment about, it was like, this tweet makes more sense when you see this person work for Social Chain, or something like that. And
Catty.
And so I was just I wound them up a little bit, and it's interesting that the conversation got to a point where they asked. I basically made the point that we were pretty big before we did a lot of personal brand stuff. I think that's the kind of the sentiment they were trying to say is that you guys did a lot of personal brand and you lied a lot about this and you inflated how big you were, stuff like that. I said, no, we were pretty big before we did that. And they asked how big were you? Is it like revenue, people count? Da, da, da. I was like, big in the way that people 10 years later still can't stop thinking about us. So,
that's a good line.
And so it's just amazing. It's amazing that people still seem to. There's definitely this some people had a chip on the shoulder about the growth of social chain, which is really interesting. That it did have this kind of impact.
Yeah, it's interesting. I continue to be asked about social chain all the time, and my overwhelming response was, you look at the success of many people that work there, the careers that they've gone on to develop, the businesses that have been born out of that. Very special place, Phil, a beacon of talent, and I think it's definitely influenced all of us how we think
Incredibly,
and what we've done thereafter. So special place in many respects, very unique, and I still see agencies today copying everything that was done, or versions of, time and time again. I actually don't think, I have not seen one agency do anything particularly original that wasn't, somewhat affiliated. And someone asked me about, like, what was it about social chain? I said, look, there's a number of things I could mention. One of the things we didn't maybe acknowledge enough was not the fact that we had a clear mission. It was the opposite, actually. It was the fact that we had an adversary. And the adversary was convention, the way that advertising had always been done, the way that Adland operators. We were the antithesis of that. And we had this youthful, arrogance combined with youthful naivety, where there was a belief that anything was possible. And we completely reinvented, the way we used to do pictures was different to everyone else. The stories that we told, we didn't condense. And it's because we didn't know better.
We just
thought we would do the most effective thing. So I think there was tons of lessons in that business. But I agree. It's very interesting seeing this hate mob that love a moment just to go,
Yeah. Like we said,
that was good.
It's very British. I don't, it's never someone from the US wouldn't even dream of it, because I think partly because social chain is, there's, a fraction of the size of the biggest agencies in the US, but there is this kind of, attitude towards competitors, which is very unique to the UK, I think.
It's one of my favorite things to do, actually, just go toe to toe with someone that disagrees with me.
Yeah.
There's part of me, it's a bit like intellectual sparring. Oh, it's so pointless.
Yeah.
Petty, it's redundant, it's a waste of time, but it's good fun. So sometimes I like to play the game. Dude, I wrote down 2 notes this week that I want to share with you. These aren't fun.
I just need to stop you really quickly. It was a Nike activation. And it was Ronaldinho.
It was Ronaldinho.
And
what, wearing Nikes?
Yeah.
There we go.
So I'll give you that one.
I knew it. I got a good radar for these things. People say anecdotes don't matter and feelings don't matter. Facts do, but feelings come from experience and insight and knowledge. There we go. This isn't my first rodeo, Catman. I knew what I was looking at.
Fair play.
2 things I wrote down. These are not fully formed ideas, so I want to run them past you. But I've been thinking a lot about talent and people and teams and org design and all of those things. And one of the thoughts that I had, and it kind of came from a conversation I had with Jason Fisher. I'm not sure he won't mind me saying this. Jason Fisher is the most talented video editor, animator, executional creative the world has ever seen. Phenomenal talent. Worked with him for almost a decade now. Really talented guy, and he's been responsible for a long time. He's basically the MD of our studio and production output, which means as new responsibilities, he has to take on a lot of managerial responsibilities, administration responsibilities, commercial, clients, all the things that come in. And I think he got to a point where he wasn't creating anymore, or he found very little room within his day to be a creator. And he's exceptional at it. And it's a real travesty, not just to the business, but to him himself, to see someone so talented not be able to do the thing that gives them fuel, inspires them, and ultimately creates value for the organization. So the conversation I had with him, and we kind of came to this conclusion, was, just because you can do everything doesn't mean you should. Because he's talented and capable and mature, he does many other things. But just because he can doesn't mean he should. And I think a lot about my own role and, I see this time and time again. People that are highly effective and skilled in organizations become victims of their own success. They get burdened with extra work. They go above and beyond. They take on new responsibilities. And the question we never ask is, at what cost? What is the opportunity missed? What is the opportunity cost? And what is the cost to that person themselves for not majority doing the thing that gives them fuel? Because usually the passion, the skill, the thing you enjoy is usually the thing you're great at. So just a bit of a rant. I wrote it down, not like for like, but I wrote like a sentence about it. Just wanted to get your take on it, as it, I suppose, if you reflect on your own career or you think about that when you're building Third Web.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of the really outdated pillars of every business in every industry, is that the only way to progress and get compensated more, right? So like that's, I think, important, right? Like the only way to progress in your career and then get paid more is to manage more people, right? That's basically the way that the old guard has worked. And that doesn't really, like you said, play to some of the best individual contributors' strengths. And Shopify, actually, they've put a lot of effort into tackling this. They have this thing called, I think it's called Mastery or something like that, where they basically have two tracks at Shopify in terms of your career development. One is, management. Can you go and become a great director, great leader, great manager? But the other is to remain executing and doing. But you also have this kind of progression track where your compensation, your title will increase, right, as your personal skill level increases. It doesn't mean that you necessarily take on more responsibility or you manage more people. You just get better at what you do, and you probably take on more responsibility, you probably have more work, but you're still executing, you're still doing something that gives you passion and gives you energy. And yeah, I think it's like one of the worst things you can do in a business is lose your edge and your executional edge, your creative edge, because you promote away the best people, the best executors into managers. And there is some benefit to scaling their brain and scaling their thought output, but I'm a big believer in the best executional people should still execute, which is why I still execute a lot. I still do a lot of the day-to-day tasks and marketing work at Third Web, because I believe that it's what I'm best at, and the business will succeed if I keep doing that. So I completely agree, and I think it's a really tricky one because it's undoing hundreds of years of how the world has basically worked.
Yeah, it's the rewiring of organizational design.
Yeah.
And what you typically find is that in those settings, you have managers that don't end up managing. Managers end up doing work, so they become ineffective and fragmented and diluted as it relates to their managerial responsibilities. And you do, I think, in an ideal world, create space for management, and there are some exceptional people that are great mentors, nurturers, organize, delegate extremely well, know what they don't know, and they are phenomenal and create value. You then have, to your point, star performers. I think there are certain jobs that lend itself really well where it's obvious. And I think about this in value creation terms. Like if I go, the difference between a okay salesperson, whatever the sales, and the world's best is exponential value creation. You could be like 100x the value of the person that's exceptional at sales. I believe the same for creatives. A creative in an ad agency that can win you a $10 million account as a consequence of that one shower thought that they had, that ends up just being the perfect thing at the perfect time, that's a potential 100x employee. You see the same with code and so on. So I think there's certain disciplines that lend itself really well. Strategists, I could go on and on. But yeah, if more organizations don't create space for the star performer or the individual contributor, I think you're probably missing a really big trick.
Yeah. Yeah, you shouldn't take away creative showers.
Is this where your best ideas come, in the shower?
My best ideas tend to come in the gym, to be honest.
In the gym, when you're pumping iron?
Pumping iron. Yeah.
Remember when we were going? We had a bet once about running, didn't we? We were doing the
What was the
5K
bet?
thing. We had a bet one year, right? That I was gonna absolutely dust you at your 5K.
And did you?
Probably. I don't know.
I think you did. Yeah, I do remember that. I'm not sure what happened to that bet. I think it probably fizzled out.
It did fizzle out. I've not run properly for a year, sporadically on and off. But I did get my 5K sub 19, which was that was a good one.
I'm sub 19, so we'll have to see.
Yeah, I still think
what?
I actually think you beat me. To be fair, I think you beat me. Believe it or not, I have the humility to say that. But if I really wanted to fuck you up, Catman, I would.
I'm sure you would.
Last point, dude. I know you got a meeting in a little bit, but it's kind of building off what we were just discussing there. You hear people talk a lot about A players. A players this. You should only hire A players. And I always find that logic, like, of course, no shit. Let's have let's have really good people. And the question then becomes, in a practical sense, what makes an A player? And we can have differing opinions on what qualities and skills we value, and we'll probably have some common ground over the things we look, the basics, work ethic, emotionally intelligent, driven. There'll be certain things that curious, high agency. There'll be certain characteristics that you could argue all A players in any given discipline have. But one of the things that, when I think about it from an organizational standpoint and a value creation standpoint, A players for me fall into three camps. There are A players that make you money, meaning the creative that comes up with the idea that ends up selling for lots, the exceptional salesperson that drives revenues, go on and on, people that create value that obviously make you money. But you have this secondary camp of A players that aren't as obvious. These are people that save you money as an organization. So these are really experienced people that maybe know things that no one else does, so they can negotiate with the supplier a better rate. These are people that are maybe culturally really valuable, so your attrition rate in the business is really low. Everybody just loves this person and wants to be around them. So, you're not on the recruitment churn all the time. And those A players are usually underrepresented and underappreciated because it isn't as obvious as the person that sells the big idea or creates the breakout product or, so on and so on. And then I think you have this really rare camp of like both. Yeah. They create immense amounts of value, but they're experienced enough, and in many other ways they save you money. So that's my theory on like a crude mental model for A players and how you could start to categorize and also ensure that you don't overlook the A players that save you money or help you make. I'm going to say, instead of save you money, because it's not all about cash, it's like help an organization make better decisions.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a better way of framing it.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of it comes down to like, I've definitely found it difficult to identify an A player in like interview stage, right? Like if I think about the A players that I work with, it's like somebody being good at interview or somebody being good at, in the application process for a job, and you think they're an A player. It doesn't always play out like that, and it's often someone that you never really expected, or there's a lot that isn't visible, like work ethic or care or just those kind of like ability to really operate at a high level. And I know what you mean when somebody says we should only hire A players. It's kind of like a bit of a shrug. Well, yeah, of course, but a lot of it is also just how do you spot the potential in somebody to become that, and then have the things in place that allows people to grow into an A player or train them up to become an A player or make them care enough, right? I think that's a lot of the thing is sometimes the culture isn't right for people to really grow into that because it's not like an environment they really care about.
Can I ask you a contrarian question? Do you think, and again it's very crude, but do you think C players can become A players? Is that possible?
I think it depends what kind of C player they are, is what I'd say. So if somebody is a C player because they are not quite that good at the day-to-day, like they're executionally not great, like they're sloppy copywriter, or they're just not the best designer, or they don't quite have that eye for creative, but they just fucking show up and work their ass off and are there every day, 100% believe they can become an A player. 100% believe. But I think there are a lot of people I've worked with who are incredibly talented, right? And there's a few things you can, there's a lot, tend to like come from, they went to a really good school, let's say, very well educated. They have all of the components to be incredibly good at what they do. And they're naturally gifted, they're naturally talented. But they kind of, maybe work 3 to 4 days a week. Friday, they're probably not there. They don't have that hunger, that desire. It's a bit of a, it's not like something they're super passionate about. Then I think it's very hard. I think it's very hard to unlearn, to unlearn those habits and unlearn that attitude. And then they're probably going to be in that stage forever. That's the only difference I'd say there.
Good. My only build on that would be that I think the environment and the organization has a huge determining factor on how well someone can perform.
Yeah.
If you put the wrong person in the wrong role doing the wrong things, they're probably not going to succeed. There are exceptional talents that will typically go on and be able to figure things out. And that's usually one of the skills I look for, is adaptability and showing a track record of winning. They don't have to win in my field, but if they show that just historically they've like won at that, they've won at that, they've won at that, they've won at that, chances are probably going to figure it out and win at this new field. But I will say, I'm yet to see anyone that within a month of work wasn't good or show some signs of being really, really good. I'm yet to see someone who like really stumbled in that first month, suddenly become exceptional after 3. I think you kind of know.
You kind of know.
And that's often to do with the standards that you either hold or just right person, wrong time, whatever the factor it is. But yeah, I'm yet to see it, to be honest.
Agreed. I think that's pretty much it. I think within a week a lot of the time, to be honest.
You're very judgmental, Catman. On that note, I am going to leave you because we agree on consensus. I feel like we've not had an argument in a while, so I'm going to pick a spicy topic next week just so we can just vehemently disagree. But maybe it's because of the United win or whatever, and considering I'm like a fake United fan.
Spirits are good right now.
Spirits are good. As always, a pleasure, brother. I'll speak to you soon.
See you next week.